we are going to jump into today's conversation, just being mindful of the time and also the dynamic speakers that we have. So keep the introductions going in the chat, please. And I am going to share my screen so that you all can jump into today's conversation with us. We thank you so much for being here. So as you know, today's conversation is what we call counseling, not criminalization, how to create healing-focused schools. And we were really intentional, you all, about entitling the webinar that way because we feel like we oftentimes talk about what the problem is and not as much what the solution is. And so our goal is to create schools that are healing-focused for our young people. And we have esteemed guests with us today. We have Daryl Baldwin, we have Cheryl Kleiman, longtime Gwen's Girl supporter and part of our family, and also Bridget Clements from the CIS program is with us today. Thank you all for joining us. And before we jump in, we wanted to also share with you all a big announcement. And it's from our friends over at Voices for Juvenile Justice. They are creating a conference or a summit, and it is going to be October 14th to 15th. It is going to be a hybrid summit, and we want to share with you all in case any of the members that are in our or BGA members or beyond who are in the room today would want to apply to present at their conference. The goal is to support, center, and amplify youth voices and connect communities while creating a more equitable and fair juvenile justice system, something I know that's important to all the people who are here today. And so we have listed just a few of the topics that they are accepting proposals around. We will make sure that the email address, voicesforjuvenilejustice@gmail.com, is in the chat. And if you wouldn't mind dropping that for me, please, so that if you were interested, you can shoot them over an email and find out how to present, whether it be in person or virtually. And so once again, that is a conference by our friends over at Voices for Juvenile Justice. But for today's webinar, we want to start by hearing from our young people. So often I've heard Dr. Kathy, Ms. Tawanda, and others say that our motto at Gwen's Girls and for the BGEA is nothing about us without us. And so from that perspective, we know it's important to hear the voices of youth. All of the issues that they face center their lives. And so therefore their voices should also be centered. So we asked them a very simple question. We said, how can emotional support? And here's what they had to say.
I'm 17 and I'm a emerging leader at Gwen's Girls.
Hi, my name is Medina and I am 16. I'm an emerging leader at Gwen's Girls. Hi, I'm Naima. I'm an emerging leader at Gwen's Girls. 17.
How can schools do a better job of providing students with emotional support?
Well, those kids who are maybe acting out in class, like misbehaving, or you see that they're a little bit more angry, like more outbursts, instead of immediately wanting to call home or kick them out of class, what's wrong? Like what's the root of the problem making them act that way? Instead of just wanting to, discard somebody, just trying to see where's it coming from instead of just, abandoning people.
Okay, so trying to find the root of the issue, not just saying the outburst and then they get off the class.
Because a lot of it comes from pain, or they're dealing with something at home, and you're just kicking them right back to that place when sometimes people come to school for escape. You know what I mean? From home.
Okay, thank you. Adina, what are your thoughts? Same question.
I agree with Dolores. She's put that so perfect, actually. I like to say like a lot with like how she said, like, don't just kick them out of the classroom, actually talk to them and actually get to know them. Because some kids, like, they just need somebody to speak to, and them like bursting out on you could be their call for help. You never know. So like stuff like, just speaking to them, asking them what's wrong, and not just always sending them to ISS. Is that what it's called?
In-school suspension.
But not always sending them there, but actually speaking to them and like, pulling them to the side and being nice too. Like, I know some teachers like, oh, if you get loud with me, I get loud with you. No, if they get loud with you, just be like, okay, I understand. I'm going to take it in. Then when you get on time, when you're calm down, that's when you can approach them. Like, okay, what was wrong? What did I do? What did I say wrong? How can I help? Questions like that could really help.
Absolutely. Naima, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say having more counselors with students. It's nice to have a teacher, a counselor, anybody in the school that they just talk to. Also, like the Lord said, not just discarding students when they are in class. There's always a root to the problem. You have to look and understand where they're coming from and discipline them with the therapeutic approach instead of just trying to punish them for, acting out in class.
Could I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
A lot of it comes from built up. We see these kids acting up because there's so much built up inside. But if you be that person that can release to you, you might see a whole complete different person.
You'll see they start probably doing it work more, all of that. Respectfully.
We're like, I ain't say about that. Okay. No, I think I know, but I do think sometimes when you reach the core of the person, then that person can say, I don't have to have this tough exterior anymore. I can be my authentic self because I know this person's going to support me and I can give them the best of me because they're giving the best of themselves to me as well.
All righty. So first up is going to be Daryl Baldwin. But before I ask Daryl to introduce herself, I just want to hear your thoughts because that was impactful for me when I first listened to it. Our young people will tell us what they need under no uncertain terms. So Daryl, when I heard them say there's always a root to the problem and discipline from a therapeutic lens, what's your reflection? What was your immediate reaction?
Well, thank you all for having me. It's always wonderful to be in space with people who are doing the same work. And as you just said, it's always interesting how people do not understand that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And hearing those young, specifically Black young girls, speak about their opportunities and what happens to them in school is very true. Just so you all know, I'm always upfront and honest. I'm a Black liberationist and an abolitionist. And that is what we believe, right? That it is more when children or youth are having an issue, there's something else behind that. And that is how we need to treat our youth and our community in general. And it is so prophetic that these young ladies understand and know this, right, at this young age. And I hope they keep that throughout their life. And that we are in a country who depends on being punitive. That is our reaction to everything, right? Because we come from a place of slavery. People don't want to talk about that history. And the fact that, the slave masters told their overseers and the people who did that work that the only way to get people to quote unquote get in line was to punish them. And that ghost of a slave master and overseer still exists in this country and everything we do, and specifically around our young and our youth and our children. And if it hasn't proven, over and over, like the Rockefeller laws, right? We're sitting here today on 420, right? Let's be real, what today is around the country, around the world, that did not work, that punishing people did not stop the issues and concerns and problems we had. But that if we go into them in a place of care and love and generating that, creates such a better outcome for people and such a better place for youth to be educated and learn about life. And the last thing I'll say is it's interesting to see them, because when we also react to them, when they said act about the teacher, not reacting, but sitting back and taking it in and then saying, okay, how can I help out? That helps you throughout your life, right? And that the children and the youth in that room are watching that adult react to a problem and an issue, and they take that lesson with them throughout their life. So we're teaching our youth how to deal with conflict, and it's imprinted on them. They are learning consistently. And that was so beautiful for them, those young ladies, to see that and be able to tell an adult, right, how to act and how to be treated and how they want to be treated, and that should go forward with them for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. And I'm always so impacted with that. As I bring up your presentation, dear, I just want to remind people that our goal today is to center the conversation really in three areas. To start with a federal lens to this issue around creating healing focused schools that depend more on counseling than criminalization, to go then to the state level in Pennsylvania, and then to go to local Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. But Dara, let people know who you are as I pull up your presentation. I just call you Superwoman, but I'm sure you have more specific roles as well.
Thank you, my sister. You are so sweet. My name is Daryl Baldwin. I'm Director of National Policy for the Center for Disability Rights. We are what is considered a CIL, a Center for Independent Living. And those are non-residential centers where people with disabilities go for services. And we work with people who all, we call them cross disabilities, so all disabilities, and from birth to grave. And in Pittsburgh, where you are, you have Three Rivers is the cell. It's a really great cell there, Center for Independent Living there in Pittsburgh. And I'm also a co-convener of the Federal School and Climate, School Discipline and Climate Coalition, which is a coalition of mostly Black and Brown organizations who, number one, put at the forefront that we believe in police-free schools, right? That's number one. And that we want to create school climate in a school that is safe for all children. And that safety is defined, as we just said here at the beginning, specifically by the youth, specifically by BiPoc youth, and it is also defined by the community. And so, do you want me to just go right into this presentation, T?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So no problem. So of course, when you do coalition work, especially at a federal level, there's three areas that we really work on. One is most definitely with the departments and the administration. I'm kind of just like how our government is split up, right? We're split up in three, right? So you have the administration. So we do work with the Department of Ed, Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, right? Because we're talking about counseling and things like that, around guidances and policies. Okay, that's one. The second area is in legislation. We all know that there needs to be some changes in our statutes, specifically around education and around how youth and children are being treated. And the third is the judiciary, although people don't really think of the judiciary as part of our work, but it really is. It's just how the government is run and work. So specifically around our legislative work, I am a registered federal lobbyist. And so of course, having statutes is important for us. But as I let people know, I did state legislation work too in New Jersey. I was a child advocate. I'm from New Jersey. And federal lobbying and work runs much different than state. State actually, I know people don't believe this, but sometimes state runs a little faster. You could get things done better at a state level. But at a federal level, unfortunately right now, the average for a bill to pass in Congress are 5 Congresses. And Congresses are 2 years, 2 calendar years, January to December is a session 1, January to December is session 2. So we currently are in the 117th Congress, which means since 1776. And then we are in the second session of that 117th Congress, which means this Congress ends December 31st of 2022. And so in that, over the past 10, 12 years, we've been really pushing to tell Congress and federal legislators that we need police-free schools. And as we said, here are the problems and why, but here's the solution. So we don't need the police in schools. We need more counseling, and we need better ways in which to handle our children. I think our 3 young women who opened us up told us exactly what we needed. And I mean, one of them said, I need more counseling. We need more counseling in school. So we, over the years, we wrote policy briefs. You have briefings to educate members of Congress. And it wasn't until the summer of 2020, which I call the reckoning of everything, and the horrific killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, Ahmaud Arbery, all of those things coming up, which, Ahmaud was not killed by police officers, but still, right, killed by people who thought they were police officers. where we got a call from Congress that said, look, we're willing to do these bills now. And so one of them was Representative Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts, and the other was Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, and said, look, we're going to take their policy brief and we're going to create a statute. And so we have now this bill, the Counseling Not Criminalization bill. You'll see the bill numbers S2125, which is the Senate, and HR 4011, which is the House. And basically what this bill does is tell school districts, if they choose in their Title IV funding not to have SROs or police officers in their school, law enforcement, which, remember the broad definition of SROs, in their school, then Congress will, we will provide more funding to them for counselors. And then we also had to tweak this bill to provide more money. It was a very low number in the first 116th, the 117th, we increased the number of millions of dollars. And then also where those counselors need to be culturally competent counselors, right? Like we all understand and all great counselors, but we need to have counselors who are culturally competent, who understand the community, who are trained around the community, who even come from the community. And so that's what this bill does. We introduced it again in the 117th earlier on. As you see here, it says for the Senate, we have 10 co-sponsors, all are Democrats, and for the House, we have 15. What does that mean? And I know people are like, oh, what is that? Co-sponsors on a bill tell the leadership of the House, in the House it's Nancy Pelosi, in the Senate is Senator Schumer, that this bill is viable and that we will pass this bill, that if you bring this bill to the floor, these 10 senators will vote yes for the bill. That's why it's important. We need to get this number up to 25 or 30 in order to get the bill even to move, meaning having a hearing, having a markup, and then moving to a floor vote. And the last thing I'll talk about here is the frustration. And I know because I've talked to a lot of advocates about this. Unfortunately, you know, we don't see these bills moving, meaning moving to the president's desk for a signature. And why is that? I'll get to that in a minute. But what is important is that you continuously create a historical record of your bill in those, remember I said 5 Congresses to get a bill passed. Why is that? Well, number one, as you know, every 2 years, the House has a election and you get new members. Literally from the 115th to the 116th to the 117th, we've had a 30 to 40% change in congressional members. House members who have retired and said, I'm not coming back. Look at what's happening right now. I think the Democrats are at 23 Democrats are not returning to the House, or unfortunately, some have died. Representative Don Young, a Republican from Alaska, just passed away a couple of weeks ago. These members are getting older. They're also getting frustrated and they're leaving. You know, like Representative Karen Bass has chosen to not run again for her Congress seat and chosen to run for mayor of Los Angeles. So she's leaving. So that means that seat is open. What does that mean? You have to re-educate these new members every time they come into Congress. And so having a congressional record, it really gets to the next person coming in. So like saying you're like, so whoever comes in for Representative Bass, hopefully, you know, it's a Democrat, you can say, well, Representative Bass is from your district and she supported this bill. Look at her name is on here. Then they will support the bill. Having caucuses like the Progressive Caucus, like we have Jayapal, who is the chair, Democrat from Washington State. She's the chair of the Progressive Caucus. She's supporting this Counseling Not Criminalization bill, and she's gonna tell her caucus to get on board. So this creates a congressional record of the bill in Congress. And then the other side of it is saying that we have a support letter that has members, organizations on that say, okay, we support this bill. All of these things work together. Even though the bill is not moving and going to the president's desk, what it does is educate the public. It could also, we've had a couple of really great articles written about our bill in the Intercept, in the Hill. And so having those conversations, yeah, helps out as well. And then the last thing I'll say, so you can, I want to make sure others get to speak, is that why is this number so low, the 10 co-sponsors and the 15 co-sponsors in the House? Well, it is unfortunate that the conversation around defund the police and the whole Democratic Party saying it like that destroyed their elections, which is controversial, and I don't believe in that at all, but has trickled down into this conversation around police in schools. So those of you who don't know this, and I want you to understand and know this, the Congressional Black Caucus has refused to say that they believe in police-free schools. The chair of the House Education and Labor Committee, who is Representative Bobby Scott, Black man, right? He's Black and Asian. He's on both caucuses, the Congressional Black Caucus and the Asian Caucus, refuses to say he believes in police-free schools. The chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, who is Representative Beatty, who's a Democrat from Ohio, who's my sorority sister, I'm a Delta, she's a Delta, refuses to say they believe in police-free schools. And this is very interesting that communities don't know this. And this is why, I get on webinars like this, and I wish you all, and I want you all to push your Congressional Black Caucus members and say, why is it the community is saying this? That they don't want police in their schools and they want to see a change? Why is it those 3 young ladies we just talked to are telling you that they are being harmed in school because of the statutes and because of the policies that are in place, and yet our own Congressional Black Caucus members won't support that or push that forward? It's very interesting to see this. I mean, even on this bill, Maxine Waters won't get on and can support counseling, not criminalization. Kwame and Fume. And these are people I pull out because they go around talking about police-free schools. But when it comes to actually supporting and saying we're going to do something, they're not doing it. And we need to call those people out. We need to make sure they know this. I will tell you who is being listened to in Congress, and that is the families of Parkland, the Parkland shooting, the March for Our Lives, the Sandy Hook families. And don't get me wrong, in this work, none of us want to see any child harm, especially see them killed by anybody. So they act like we can't have both. Like we are against police being in schools, then that means we're against police shootings. Against school shootings, and like we're okay with that, or like this is the only way to solve this. And unfortunately, those are white families. And so white families are being listened to and heard, but yet the families who are mostly BIPOC families who are saying this is not how we want this addressed are not being heard, are not being respected, and we need to change that. And so we hope, join the Federal School Discipline Climate Coalition. I know Gwen's girls are members, so you'll get our information. And we hope that you tell your members of Congress, specifically the Pennsylvania contingency. We've had meetings with Senator Casey, Bob Casey, we've had 3 of them, still not on this bill. He's on the Health Committee, which is that Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee, where this bill sits, where Chris Murphy is his cohort on that. He's a committee member as well. And Bob Casey won't get on this bill. Why is that? That's very interesting. And he needs to be asked that question. Why are you not supporting what our children are telling you, what our families are telling you to get these police officers out of school? So I'm going to stop there, T, and throw it back to you.
Thank you. And in the chat, Angela said, so sad to hear Maxine Waters isn't on board. And my question is, how do you just keep the troops galvanized when you talk about 5 Congresses needed to pass a bill? I think I would have tapped out after the first one. How do you keep people engaged in this work? I think there's a lesson here for all of us.
No, very good question, and you're correct. And how we do it is this, having these conversations, right? Continuously educating people about this process. As you know, we all know nothing worth having, right, is not worth fighting for. Also showing them the progress, right? Like literally, when I just gave this story, for 12 years, we wrote policy briefs. And we had meetings with people over and over again and they said, no, we're not going to do it. And then, here came an opportunity where we had 2 members of Congress who put this forward. There are really great success stories, right? In ESSA, when we finally reauthorized, right, the No Child Left Behind, which became ESSA, I mean, none of us thought that would ever happen. And it finally happened, and we got the language we wanted in there. Let's be real. Look at what just happened a couple of weeks ago. 100 years of working on the anti-lynching bill. Let me say that again. 100 years, right? The first meeting on an anti-lynching bill was in the president 1896, 94, right? Black woman, right, went to the White House to have a meeting and saying, you need to stop this, you need to have this. And here we are 100 years later, and the bill passed and it was signed by a president. It does happen. And so we have to continue to push those things forward. We have to have hope. And we have to understand that that is the process, and that every time we do something, it leaves an imprint and it leaves a place for change for somebody's child, for our children, for our youth to see. And I hope that's what keeps people going. And also, like we tell people, when you register to vote and start voting, this will help. We need candidates, we need members of Congress who think like us. So that's what also gives people hope, is that right now you have, the squad is there and the squad is growing. People like Jayapal, people like Ayanna Pressley, people, like Omar and Ileana, people like Senator Chris Murphy. I mean, Chris Murphy is from Sandy Hook, from Connecticut, and he went against those families. Who would have thought he would tell them, you are wrong, police don't belong in schools? That was Chris Murphy. That is his district, that is his state. And he did that. So I hope that gives people hope to know a change is coming. And if we stop, change won't happen.
And then Sarah asked a real good question that I'm sure may be on other people's minds as well. Does the slow progress around police-free schools, does it have something to do with the teachers union, or just more generally, Daryl, what is their role? What kind of conversations are you all having?
So very good question, Sarah. So yes, so when it comes to the teachers union, NEA in particular, as well as AFT. Again, they're doing a tap dance in the conversation. They may tell, like they have told Senator Chris Murphy, yeah, we endorse this. We're all for this, but they won't tell the public that. They will not be on congressional record, which means they send a letter in that says we support Counseling, Not Criminalization Act. They have not done that. Not done that yet. It is sad, even the civil rights organizations, right? NAACP, NULL, NAN, right? Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights will not come out and say, we believe in police-free schools. And so that holds up progress around this bill. And back to the unions, I mean, Randy Weingarten has been called out because her local chapters, they're like, I'm here in New York visiting, New York State AFT, Michigan AFT, they all are supporting police-free schools. But the national office will not come out and say that. And it is political. NEA, same thing. They will not say they support police-free schools. And before I leave, we have a suite of bills, which will show my other slides later, or you can show everyone later, which means we know that Counseling, Not Criminalization is the only legislation that's going to change things. We have one CASA, which is keeping all students safe, which is ending restraint and seclusion, specifically of children with disabilities. And we have one POSA, which is protecting students, the SAFE Act, which ends corporal punishment. People don't know this. Corporal punishment is still a law in 19 states. Children are still beaten and whipped, right? And I bring those up because NEA has been the block for any restraint seclusion. They will not tell the public this. They tell Congress this. Our teachers need to be able to restrain and seclude children. And so where is that? Where is the voice, right? So they are blocking, right? Ending restraint and seclusion of children. It is specifically NEA who says they support this, and it is necessary, and their teachers need this in order to keep the classroom safe. And then the same thing with PALSA when it comes to corporal punishment. Now AFT and them will support that. Why is that? Because the 19 states where corporal punishment is still a law are southern states. And what are not in southern states? Unions. There are very few unions in Mississippi and Texas, right? AFT is not down there, so they don't care. They're like, oh, okay, we'll support that. But whenever it comes to Black and brown families and our issues and concerns, these unions are a problem. And it's interesting to see there's no data and research where they have questioned and surveyed the teachers independently. It's always their survey and them telling us, oh, this is what our teachers want. And I find it very interesting that Black and brown educators are telling NEA and AFT this is what they want. So they are very much a problem. And as I said, what I say, I know I'm being recorded. What I say is what I've said to them. Randy Weingarten knows this. They are very much a problem to our solutions.
Thank you so much, Dara. We are going to come back to you because I think there is a conversation around accountability that needs to be had at the federal, state, and local level. But before we transition over to Cheryl Kleiman, I do want to hear from our girls once again, because we did ask them, what do they think about police in schools? So let's hear from them what they think about police in schools.
What are your thoughts on police in schools? Have you found them helpful, harmful, or what are your thoughts?
My thoughts on police in schools is they don't have no restriction. So basically, like, police, they think, whenever you're a police, you're supposed to apply the force, but they don't understand they're in school now, so it's different. Like, these is kids, these is not jail kids, they're not criminals. They're not criminals. These are real students here trying to learn. You're supposed to protect them, not harm them. Like, I understand, like, they're fighting and you want to break it up, but there's certain things you can do and certain ways to actually stop the fight. Like, they need to get trained better on the calmness more than the protection. I want to say they're not keeping them safe. They're more so harming them. Like, I haven't seen anything, but I'm saying, like, they're more rough. Like, they shouldn't be as rough. We're children at the end of the day.
Same as you're in agreement with her. Do you have anything to add?
I agree with her as well. I feel like police in school makes students feel like they're in a prison, and that's not what school should feel like. School should have more counselors more than any police officers, and it's like they're using so much force instead of actually being trained how to de-escalate situations instead of making them worse. And also, seeing somebody in your school with a gun and all these handcuffs and things, it might make you feel unsafe as well. So I feel like having police in schools really is necessary, and there's better ways to approach the situations.
Okay. Lord, do you have, thank you, Naima. Lord, do you have any thoughts on that, or have any experience with police being in your school?
I think there's a couple ups and downs to having police in schools. I think with police being there, it's less common for things to pop off because police is right there. What can you do? But it seems like they have good intentions, but it's just not executed well. Like when it comes to breaking up fights, why do I see on Instagram that kids are being slapped on their head for the police? You can effectively pull somebody off of somebody and not treat them as if they're felons about to go into the thing where they get processed and stuff. Right. It's not like that. We're in school.
Again, a lot to digest there coming from our young people. Cheryl, we are going to turn to you first to introduce yourself and then to provide to what our young people just said.
Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to be with you again. I'm Cheryl Kleiman, a longtime BGEA member. I now work for Senator Lindsey Williams, who is a state senator here in Pennsylvania, representing the 38th district. She is also the minority chair of the Senate Education Committee, which means that in my role for her, I both serve as her legislative director, but I staff the senator as chairwoman and staff the Democratic members in the caucus on education bills that are introduced in the Pennsylvania Senate and get referred to the Education Committee. So it is in that hat that I will probably be here most of the time. I'll let folks know if I want to take that hat off and say something else. And then reflecting on the girls, I want to pick up a thread that Dara wove in around when I believe there's been some studies or talking to police and communities around where they see the danger coming from and the role of police in schools. Because when you talk to police who police predominantly white schools, they say they are there to protect the students from a danger outside the school, but the danger is coming from outside the building. But when you talk to police and communities who are policing predominantly Black and brown schools, they see that they are there to police the children. And I think we heard that from the girls, where and I think that tension around the role of policing, we also hear from the Parkland families and the Sandy Hook families, that's happening at the state legislative level as well. There is a parent from Parkland who has experienced horrific trauma, but has deemed himself now a school security expert and is coming around after doing a lot of work at the federal level to say, okay, now I'm going to shop this around state to state and see how we can increase policing as a response to community violence. There's a response to the fact that it has been 2 years and we are asking children to go back to school and follow rules and be disciplined with no additional supports, with no recognition of what our young people have grown up with for their entire lives. So those are some of the initial thoughts I have.
Thank you, Cheryl. And that is so powerful. If we can find that research, we will definitely share it with folks because it's intuitive, right? I know Dara and I have also had conversations around what safety looks like to BIPOC families versus white families. And so this idea that, as you mentioned, in white schools, the threat is outside the building. In BIPOC schools or in Black schools, in this case, the threat is inside of the building definitely explains so much about what we are contending with and why our advocacy on multiple levels is so important. So I am going to pull up your slide, Cheryl, and then turn it over to you.
So one of the things Shashira asked me to start with was some insight around what is going on in Harrisburg within our state legislature. And unfortunately, I would say Pennsylvania state legislature is pretty typical of what we're seeing in Republican-controlled legislatures across the country, especially in an election year, which this is here in Pennsylvania. So that shows up both in terms of the content of the bills that are being considered, as well as the process of how bills are given an opportunity to be voted on or not. Because in Pennsylvania, the party in charge completely controls the agenda, and the rules are that at this point, given the Republican control of the House and the Senate, they do not need a single Democratic vote on most things to get it to the governor's desk. So as I mentioned, my area of focus is the Senate Education Committee and the bills that come through our committee. Shashira, do we have time for me to go through some of the bills that are getting a vote and some of them that aren't?
And I think that's critical. Cheryl, please do.
So as I mentioned, only bills that the majority chair decides a committee should vote on come up for a vote. So here is an example of some bills that the Senate Education Committee has recently considered, which that means those are bills that have been introduced by a member, referred to our committee because they're relevant to education, and then the committee has voted to move them to the floor for the whole Senate to vote on them. So just recently, we voted on a bill that discriminates against trans girls by banning their participation in sports from kindergarten to college. We moved forward bills to increase vouchers for private schools, estimated to divert billions of dollars from public schools over the next 5 to 10 years. We have spent a lot of time on two bills that require every school building in the Commonwealth to post a plaque with the US and Pennsylvania Constitution, but only the preamble, not the Bill of Rights or the section of the Pennsylvania Constitution that requires us to provide a thorough and efficient system of public education. And in preparation for this conversation, I looked at my committee's list of bills that have been introduced by members, referred to the committee, but because a single senator gets to decide what bills get a vote, are likely never to see the light of day and are aligned with some of the policy priorities that BGA is advocating for. So there is a bill that is sitting in our committee to increase access to school counselors, social workers, and school nurses. There is a bill about allowing schools to partner with social service agencies to teach students about affirmative consent and preventing dating violence. There is a bill that requires the Pennsylvania Department of Education to develop a curriculum so high schools could teach Black history if they want to, just even to have an option. And there is a bill that would allow immigrants who live in Pennsylvania to become certified teachers because currently they cannot. So those are a little sort of snippet of some of the sort of education bills that are currently deemed as priority by the Pennsylvania legislature and those that are not.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, Cheryl, you and I talked about that kind of being a hard pill to swallow. And I felt that although it was a hard pill to swallow, it was a necessary one for us to just be aware of. Not surprising, but sometimes, you know, as advocates, we can preach to the choir and forget that there are many, many voices that are across the sand. And so if we can just have a conversation, Cheryl, about strategy, because you have such great insight about if we are in this political climate right now in Harrisburg, how do we actually move things forward, especially when we talk about creating healing-focused schools?
So I think there's a couple strategies. I would say the guidance that Dara has given us about at the federal level around the importance of creating a record of saying, at the moment, there is not a likelihood that this bill is going to move, because to be clear, at the moment, if there is a bill in which a Democrat is the first name on that bill, it is likely not to go anywhere. There are some few exceptions, but that is our reality. So there is value in saying, this may not be the moment, but I'm going to lay, you know, this baton is going to be ready for the next person to either introduce it next session. Our leadership composition is going to be different. Or, I mean, I look at other states' bills for models. So it could be that we say, this is what we put this out there. Maybe it's not going anywhere in Pennsylvania, maybe it is for somewhere else. So I think there is a balance of trying to see, are there some common sense, low hanging fruit that maybe we could find a Republican champion and do some bipartisan work and see if we could get some of those changes done. And we can talk about, if it's helpful, how the Juvenile Justice Task Force might be an example of that. But I think we also then need to recognize that that in itself takes a lot of capacity. So are we spending our capacity on what might be low-hanging fruit that have a chance and not focusing on what the young people are saying is what's most impactful, what would actually have a transformative effect on their lives? And I think there's a tension there that we as a collective need to sit with and make maybe different choices in different moments. But I think there's value in both. I would also say in Pennsylvania at the state level, we are coming up on the end of the governor's term. There's a gubernatorial election coming up. We do not know who our next governor will be, but we have a window of a governor who is looking to make his legacy often with executive action or administrative action. So I think there is a question, and this is why having folks at the federal, state, and local level, I think, is helpful, and experts that you can continue to tap, because there is a question of what is the right forum for this change. So maybe I cannot pass a law through a regulation, but what are the things that impact students' lives that we could change through regulation? And that's a different process with some different actors. But at the moment, for the sorts of changes, we are seeing that avenue being used. So that could be something that in a future conversation, we could have a deeper dive into. Maybe let's look at our priorities, which, if any of these, might be ripe for administrative action.
That's really helpful to note. Can you just off the top of your head, give us an example of the kind of action that the governor could take through administrative action?
So the governor could do two things. So there is guidance that the state provides to schools about how the administration interprets laws. So in Pennsylvania, those are called basic education circulars. And those have had a big impact on telling schools, this is what we mean by equity. This is what we mean by fairness. This is what we mean by how we interpret these federal rights that students with disabilities have, that English learners have. This is how schools in Pennsylvania should meet those rights. And that sort of guidance can happen strictly from an administrative perspective. And that can be in conversation with the governor's office or with the departments that administer those sorts of laws. So in our case, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, but also Health and Human Services, which governs more of the deeper end, the kiddos that are in the child welfare, juvenile justice systems. And then I would say there's also regulation, which is where the state department covering an issue says, we have authority under statute to enact regulations. And that has happened currently through the Board of Education. They're doing some professional standards changes around encouraging teachers to have cultural competency and requiring that to be part of the higher education programs that are required to become a teacher. That, for example, is currently happening via regulation.
Thank you, Cheryl, for those examples. I think that's just important to kind of tease that out for folks, that not everything takes legislation as far as change is concerned. And then Amanda asked, does Cheryl have any insights on the prospects for the nelliebly scholarship bill?
So for folks to know, nelliebly is a scholarship program that devotes state dollars to reduce the cost of attending a state higher education institution, PASHE, for those who know that term. And this year also includes community colleges. So we are having this conversation, I would say, on the cusp of entering budget season in Pennsylvania. So budget season is where the deals get made, what is being funded and not for the next year. So nelliebly has been part of the governor's proposal for what education funding should look like this year. And I imagine it will be on the table and one of the chips being negotiated with, I believe it's Senator Fontana, you correct me, Amanda, who has also introduced it as a standalone bill. But I would say it is too early in the process to make bets about which of these education priorities are likely to get funded. And unfortunately, that all happens among a pretty small group of members who up to the last minute are making deals before it goes through the whole Senate. So what I would say, and Amanda sort of prompted me to say it now, is I will note that many of us on this call are represented by State Senator Jay Costa, who is the Democratic leader for the Pennsylvania Senate. So he is one of the few members that is in those rooms making those deals. And there is value in this group collectively or organizations individually, recognizing lots of nonprofits that need to be careful about how they engage with their elected officials, but it's totally appropriate for folks in a nonprofit capacity to provide education to their elected officials. This is something that is important to us. This is something we want you to know would impact your constituents and community, and we're asking for you to make it a priority in budget negotiations this summer.
Thank you, Cheryl. And as a matter of fact, some of our Begala girls joined a advocacy day recently there in Harrisburg. For the questions, thank you, Sarah and Amanda. Folks, please keep those coming in, because after we hear from Bridget in just a bit, we are going to open up our Q&A for our panelists. As you close out though, Cheryl, you've mentioned the governor's task force several times. Can you give us an update on where that work is? I know many of us who are in the room today are familiar with it.
Yeah, and for those that are not, just a very quick recap. Last summer, a bipartisan group that was convened by the governor came together with a list of recommendations of how to reform the juvenile justice system in Pennsylvania. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that these are not the type of reforms that would put us on a path to liberation. These are not the abolitionist changes that are necessary and that Gara is centering us with in this conversation. These are the low-hanging fruit that are really at best harm reduction around the quality and safety of children who are within the juvenile justice facility and trying to end or begin to address push out from schools. So as a brief update, Pew was hired to facilitate that task force, and those consultants are now took the recommendations that the task force released last June and divided up the recommendations into categories that correspond with the legislative committees. So in the Senate, recommendations have been given to the chairs of 5 committees. And the idea is that those committee chairs, both the Democrats and the Republicans, would work together to introduce bills that would implement those recommendations. But that was June, and now we're here in April, and unfortunately only 2 of the 5 committees have even circulated memos indicating their intent to introduce bills. Memos are a way that members get other senators or House members to sign on to their bills before they're introduced. So we unfortunately have seen the intent for bills to come out of the Judiciary Committee and the State Government Committee, but we do not yet have any bills that would be having to go through the Health and Human Services Committee, the Aging and Youth Committee, or the Education Committee. So I do think there is an opportunity to contact the chairs of those committees, Education, Aging and Youth, and Health and Human Services, and I can drop in the chat once I'm done a link where to figure out who are those chairs and encourage them to introduce legislation that would implement the Juvenile Justice Task Force recommendations. A lot can happen between now and when the budget wraps on June 30th, but this is the time. If we were going to see movement on those items, it would need to be now.
Okay, thank you. I'm writing notes feverishly because I feel like, Cheryl, that's our marching orders. So you all, please, if you were in the room with us today, also join our BGEA work group meetings. I think around this issue, education and juvenile justice would be great places for this conversation to land. So thank you so much, Cheryl. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Bridget, it's a lot on your shoulders, friend. I mean, we have been told that it takes 25 years to pass anything. And at the federal level, Cheryl has shared some insights around the legislation that is being introduced. And so now we're here with you at the local level. Can you tell folks who you are?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Bridget Clement, Executive Director of Communities and Schools Pittsburgh. And we are part of a national network that provides integrated student supports. And really what that is it's case management, it's working with schools to improve climate, it's being kind. It's being someone there that if a student needs something, they can go and be received and get what they need.
Absolutely. And I'm going to pull up your slide, Bridget, because I know you have some background about the SIS program that would be really helpful for us today.
Yeah. I just figured this would be an easy way to kind of understand it, because I could go into services for probably an hour or two. It just really depends. What we do is we customize our approach at every district that we serve, at every school that we serve. We do that by, employing a climate study needs assessment in the beginning, doing some asset mapping to understand what the programs and services are that are around, as well as other community programs and supports that may or may not be known and used by the school. The whole purpose really is to build that bridge from the school out to the community and from the community back into the school. We want to integrate these two together again, because frankly, they just can't operate in isolation.
Absolutely. And it is as simple as that. So I want to stop sharing my screen because we do want to hear from you at the community level. We know that unfortunately your program is not in every single school in Allegheny County.
Oh no. Not yet.
And so the first question is, what are some of the barriers that you face to, as you mentioned, just being kind and providing students with?
Well, yeah, it's been a challenge from the word go, but the pandemic has layered on just a whole other level of challenges. Everyone's exhausted, first off. Teachers, administrators, students, it's been too much. We're all still actively going through a collective trauma. And we don't talk about that in any kind of a way. We don't really deal with it. We just expect people to get over it and keep moving. This is not good for our adults that have to lead situations, and that's not good for our students who are trying to learn. I find it very interesting and something that I think is absolutely true that the girls brought up. They say it all. They did. They said it all. I don't need to say anything because the first girls, they had it. They want people to get to know them. They want people to be nice to them. They don't want people to get in their face. No kidding. But here's the thing I'm going to impress upon people is that as the adults, as the leaders, we go first, which means that it's on us. I don't care how frustrating it is. It's on us to show respect and kindness first. I hear so much, and I have a teenage daughter. So I have a teenage daughter in Brashear High School. If I hear one more time about somebody disrespecting somebody, I swear. But my point is this: there's no way to show someone what respect looks like to you if you don't give it to them first. We have to model that behavior if we want our students to learn it. And sometimes I walk into some schools and it is like the teaching staff have become the students. Now, believe me, this is not all teachers. There are so many fabulous teachers who are exhausted from the same things and are beating their head against a wall. And right now, my biggest concern is they're the ones leaving. They're the ones leaving the profession for the same reason that we have legislators leaving, because it seems like we are doing stuff that is counterproductive and no one's listening, and we just keep replaying the definition of insanity. So challenges have, these are all here in Allegheny County with our 43 school districts, which means 43 elected school boards, which means 43 superintendents and administrations and buildings and all of these things. But the people, power is something that is, even on a local level, it's intoxicating, I guess, because we have school board members that never leave and really serve to be an obstacle. And I don't know how, but we have to get families, we have to get, I mean, I know what Gwen's Girls is doing, what One PA is doing. There's a lot of people who are trying to mobilize families to say, you have to vote in every election, but especially in the local ones, because this is where it affects you the most. And we don't.
Absolutely. And I think there's also a piece to this that we've discussed before, Bridget, about students with disabilities, right? Talk to us about what you're seeing regarding those students and how they seem to be at the almost highest incidence of being pushed out of school.
Right. Well, again, our schools are hyper stressed environments anyway. We have teachers that have 30 plus kids in a classroom. They're under-resourced. They don't have any, support or very little. And then we put students with exceptionalities in the room, which we should, and they should be there. And they should be as much a part of the room as everyone else is. But our teachers and our education system, the way we teach our teachers to instruct, is we teach right to the middle. So those ones that are up here and those ones down here just sort of trail around, because we are so focused on teaching to a test. Now that's something that locally we can't do very much about. But this high stakes testing doesn't prove a thing. And it also doesn't educate. Because I think the things that we miss, especially in all of this high stakes testing, is the important things that we need to pass on to all kids. The social emotional learning, the how do you study, okay, so you do have learning exceptionalities. How do we use technology to support your efforts? How do we customize learning even a little bit for those who need it the most? Because the thing that happens and drives me absolutely crazy, I'm also a mother of a child with a major disability, but it's that this is a negative thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's the negative. Oh, your poor student, your poor child. Oh, it's so bad. No, this is how this individual was brought into this world. And they have skills and abilities. We just have to know how to tap them and how to help them reach their full potential. And that's how we need to educate our educators. But we just keep doing the same stuff. And I think too, the other thing that divides us from, super stressed parents who are working, who are raising kids, who may have kids with exceptionalities and are not sure how to support them. We talk over them. We've so educated our educators that the parents, they just talk right past each other. I've sat in IEP meetings where I've had a teacher read something to me and explain what the word meant. To which I was like, if you didn't think I knew this word, why would you put it in a document for me? But this is how we interact. And so we've lost that ability really to look at people and say, okay, how do I find that common ground? How do I reach you? And so when we're talking about kids with exceptionalities and special needs, that can be anything. That can be ADHD, that can be any mental health, anything. We have no patience because we have to get from point A to point B. And so our teachers have to teach, they have to teach certain things, they have to get it done. And if this student is causing a problem, I need them out of the room so that I can focus on the other kids, because if this student is taking more of my attention, then it's a disservice to the majority of the students. These are the choices our teachers make. They're the choices that they're set up to make. And they're the decisions that they have to make. And then we layer implicit bias and systemic racism on top of that. And then you ask the question, why is there no equity in our schools? I don't know that there's any. I mean, this is what's going to happen. The kids that have the greatest needs and require that kind of constant attention just aren't going to get it.
So there's been this through line in our conversation today, I hope, Bridget, about what can be done at each level.
Right.
So at the local level, I hear you when you say encouraging parents, families to vote, getting the community more involved in schools. Systemically, what shifts and changes in that 40 plus school districts throughout Allegheny County would you like to see happen that you think are possibilities?
One thing I would like to see, I know that we have greater numbers of educators that are interested, embracing, or somewhere educated or somewhere learning about trauma-informed care. Now, there's still a way to go on understanding what trauma-informed means and actually doing it. It's a practice, and it's a thing that really hinges on you as a human being, not on everyone else. So that gets challenging because you got to be in the moment, figuring out how to manage emotions when somebody's coming at you, pushing every button you have. So I think that we would go a very, very long way if we found a way to support our teachers, because they are human beings. They can't even go to the bathroom when they need to, right? They feel largely that they're not listened to. Things just get pushed down onto them and they have to deal with it. And so their morale is in the toilet. So how do they walk into a room, push all of that aside, pretend like it doesn't bother them, not to mention whatever they've got going on in their personal life, and deal with kids that may have some severe trauma in their lives, which have created some very dysfunctional coping mechanisms. So I think the more support we can provide to our teachers, the better. The more support we can provide to our students and our families. We have to look at the data coming from the schools, like attendance, like behavior, and act early. And you can do that very simply, but of course, it all becomes a capacity issue. If we have the people to follow up, to call a family, to go visit the family, to be consistent with that student, attendance will get better, grades will get better. Our prospects will get better as a community because we won't just be throwing kids away or graduating them with absolutely no proficiency.
Yeah, and this reminds me of what Dr. Kathy often says, which is that when we talk about providing counseling, not criminalization, it's not necessarily about just getting police out. It's about what we want to see.
An alternative.
What is the replacement? And that's what we should be centering the conversation.
And that is so true. And that is probably the biggest message that I think needs to get out there, because people just hear that and understand that the reason why the police, at least I will say this for any school district that I have worked with, the police are there because the teachers are afraid. They're afraid of the violence that the students bring through the door. So they rely, and there's been several cases that I've witnessed where they rally around terrible leadership because they think that they're doing a good job keeping them safe. We forgot that we're supposed to have the schools be safe for the students. And again, we forget to make decisions based on what's best for the students. They have to be central all the time.
Yeah, and I was on a call earlier today with the state juvenile justice funder, and then hearing the young people speak today about just the trauma, Bridget, that our young people experience, not just what they bring to school, but what it means to go through metal detectors and to be that are.
It is it's absolutely re-traumatizing. First off, the schools that we work with are in, the neighborhoods that have some of the greatest levels of economic, low socioeconomic diversity. So we've got lots of free and reduced lunch, almost exclusively free and reduced lunch students. And those populations and students who are coming from, let's say, projects, those areas are over-policed to begin with. These neighborhoods are over-policed. We know this. Then we have this student go into school where there is also a police officer there. The school sort of operates in a lockdown mode. And the police officer is brought in for punishment or to, I won't use the word diffuse, because it's not to diffuse. It's just to stop whatever's happening by whatever means are necessary. Diffusing means you take a little bit more time and you try not to create an explosion. I don't think we're avoiding that in some of these situations. And that creates so much trauma and stress, because again, the message is that you as a person are somehow less than, because we have to keep watching you and we have to make sure you don't do these things that are not right. And really all we're saying is you're not complying with the way we think a teenager should behave. And believe me, there are a lot of really strange ideas out there about how teenagers should how they should behave. And I'm going to tell you right now, they are loud, they're obnoxious, and that's what they're supposed to be. That's how it has to be safe to be a kid. This is the one time in your life when it's okay to make a mistake and you learn from it, so that when you're an adult, you don't make the same mistakes. But our schools, unfortunately, have gotten so focused on punishment as the end goal and compliance as the end goal that they've forgotten that the most important thing about having a kid that makes a mistake is getting to teach them that important lesson. And it'll impact them for the rest of their life.
Like, we have to unplug from this carceral response to everything.
Yes. Everything is not, I hear this, it's true. We have become a society that is just, we course correct and we go from one extreme to the other. I get whiplash from it from time to time. It's kind of like this. Okay, so we needed to have remote learning because of the pandemic. So now we've got that. We got remote learning. So now what we're going to do is play a game where we push all of the students that are a pain in the butt out onto remote learning.
Oh,
now
wow.
we've taken something, right? But this remote learning is all asynchronous, by the way. So it's just on them to log in and do the work. Would that, if kids can teach themselves,
there will be no need for schools.
Right? What are we doing here? So my thing is, okay, so we just took something that could have been a good innovation and we've turned it to something that now there's going to have to be a regulation about, that's going to go, okay, well, now we can't have this technology. And we're just going to go back and forth like this instead of going, hey, you know what? It's best when kids are in school. We got to figure that out. Let's figure out how we make this a safe and a communal environment, one that we all have social responsibility for, and instead of just, trying to figure out how to get the power and control.
Thank you, Bridget. And we got an amen in the chat from Heather. Amy, can you do me a favor and bring Cheryl and Daryl back up in the last 15 minutes or so of our conversation, because we've been talking a lot about safety. And I know, Daryl, you had some thoughts around threat assessment bills. Can you tell us what those are and why they're important to this conversation around healing-centered schools, healing-focused schools?
Yes, sure. So thank you for the conversation. It's been excellent. Yes, unfortunately, in this Congress, we've had, there's about 5 of them, threat assessment bills. And what that means is that schools will be setting up, assessing the threat of the school, as we just discussed, what safety is. And again, right, this definition of safety and this definition of public safety, right, and who is safe in that conversation. And what we see with these bills is that, number one, threat assessments come from the NSA, the national security community, which are based on adults. Let's start right. Number two, they're racist. They've always been racist, right? As you all know, when you look at a national security, it's Muslims are a threat, right? It is brown people are a threat. And so you're bringing that into the school system. And unfortunately, the way in which these programs are being set up, they're coming through the Department of Homeland Security, which, in case you don't know, there is a national, right, a federal DHS, but then some states have actually implemented a DHS, right? I don't know if Pennsylvania has theirs, like Maryland, I do know. Maryland has a Department of Homeland Security for Maryland. And they are using those agents and those people to surveil the students. In fact, in Prince George's County is where they've decided to start this, in Maryland. And if you know anything about Prince George's County in Maryland, there's a part of Prince George's County that sits right next to the District of Columbia, right? It's, you know, if you know the history of DC, right? DC statehood, I have to say. But anyway, DC, part of it was Maryland, part of it was Virginia. But anyway, that section, of course, is where they're implementing that program. It is not on the other side of Prince George's County, which is mostly white, right? It's not over there, it's over in this area. But anyway, so you have that. Then you also have our Secret Service police officers, the National Association for Secret Service, just so you know, any profession, they all got a national association. And anyway, they've decided to delve into this concept of using threat assessments in schools. And that means that they're going to assess a student and what students say and how students act for who might be these shooters. Again, right, this is the Secret Service, who the Secret Service really is around to protect adult political figures. So, you know, it's not just the president of the United States, right? It's the vice president. It's some members of Congress have Secret Service, like Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, and Chuck Schumer, you know, those who are more prominent in the community, they have Secret Service, right? Then, of course, there are some children, right? Like the Obama girls still have Secret Service and always will until they want to give them up. But anyway, you know, when we saw these bills, I was asking Secret Service, how many of you are educators? Who in there is an educator? Who's been inside a school before? And they don't have any of that, right? But they do have these quote unquote data. And also when you look at the data, it is not evidence-based research. It is not peer-reviewed research. It is research done by the people who, of course, want these programs, right? And want to have this done. And again, you know, when we had a whole conversation with them. So one of them is the Eagles Act. And I've given you a slide, and you'll see the slides with all the bills on there. And the Eagles Act is being sponsored by Chuck Grassley of Iowa, the Republican of Iowa, in the Senate. And unfortunately, Ted Deutsch, who's a Democrat from Florida, right, from Parkland. And this is the Parkland schools, this is their bill. And Chuck Grassley, which, you know, I'll give Mr. Grassley some credit. He is considered a disability, you know, champion because he was around for the ADA. And I'm laughing because when we were in session and I would walk around and he would see me, he'd come here, disability lady, let me talk to you. He's like, why don't you agree with this? So he's one of those guys who will talk to you, right? So his staffer was like, yeah, he wants to talk to you. Why you guys don't? Because we sent a letter of opposition with about 70 organizations, and he wanted to know why would civil rights groups not support this. And so the threat assessments, you know, are saying, like, if a child says that they want to commit suicide, that's the child you should be following, and that's the one who's going to shoot up the school. If a student has issues with mental health problems, when we all know the evidence-based research for over 30 years from psychologists, from clinicians, that is not true. People who are ready to commit suicide are asking for help. They need help. It is very rare that someone who is in mental health crisis can literally take a gun, put bullets in it, and do something with it. They just mentally cannot do that. They usually do crimes of passion, meaning they will pick up whatever's near them and use that: scissors, a pencil, a pen. And even that, they have to be taunted or pushed to do that. Their goal in committing suicide is to harm themselves, right? Which is still bad, but that's not right what's happening there. The other side, like I said, is threat assessments are racist. When you look at the indicators of what has been set up around this world, around who's a threat in this world, it is always Black and brown folks. Let's look at Ukraine. And those Nigerians and Black Ukrainians who were trying to get out of the country, and yet the white Ukrainians still said, you're a threat, and put them in detention centers. Okay, they still there now. Or the ones who did get over the border and went to Poland, Poland put them in detention centers. So this is what we think about threat assessments around who is a threat in a situation, in a place. So of course, in a school, it's Black and brown students. And these bills, they are very slick about how they're doing it. As I told you, our bills are going through the House Education and Labor, the Senate Health Committee. That's where education bills should be. Well, these bills are being put through the DDAC, which is the Department of Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. Which is a very slick way of getting around educators who will tell you this is bad, and talking to national security folks who don't know anything about schools and education and say, oh, well, this sounds good. Yeah, we got to do this because we got to make the schools safe. As you know, Cheryl said, you know, white schools are worried about shooters and worried about the outside. And the last thing I'll say, when people bring this up about, well, we got to protect those schools, specifically white folks. And I always say to them, what about our students when they leave school, as Bridget so eloquently said, they live in places of low socioeconomic status. So when they go to the roller skating rink, when they go to the park, the playground, when they just walk back and forth to school, it's a treacherous route for them. Are you going to protect them all the way to back and forth in school when they go to play basketball? And that's not happening for our students. Like as if school is the only place that these threats and these things are happening in their life. And that is not true. But when it comes to white families and white communities, yeah, that is true. And when you look at the data, those shootings are happening in white schools and by white young men. Let's be very clear here. And so they don't want to do that. And then when I ask your question, well, if it's okay to have these so-called security threats and security programs, why is it only for the Black schools? Why is it for only the schools who are in low socioeconomic status communities? Put them in your school. If you want them near yours, go right ahead and put them in your school. And then we got problems. They don't want it, but our students don't need it. It is you people who are dangerous and a threat to society. And this starts from our kids, youth, to their adulthood. Broken windows program, right? Of adults walking down the street, rolling down the street, and you are a threat. You can't even travel in this country and not be considered a threat because of your race, because of what you may have been carrying on you, what you look like, what you're doing, your religious belief. If you wear your religious belief on the outside, right? Like wearing a headpiece or a yarmulke or something like that, a head wrap, you are considered a threat because you're not the quote unquote norm in our community. And that is being brought into our schools through these threat assessment bills. And they are specifically on behavioral health, right? And on basically race. They are racist bills. And so that's, and it's unfortunate that Democrats are, that's, and I tell people, these parties, it doesn't matter. So Democrats and Republicans are supporting this. And if these bills pass, I think they could be more harmful than any other statutes that we have standing right now for our children in schools. Because now you are starting to assess people in their young ages of life And that will be on their record forever. They won't be able to go to college. They won't be able to get into any kind of, even if they want to do a blue collar program, like, you know, be a mechanic, a master plumber. They won't be able to do that with this threat assessment on their record.
It's so scary. I mean, it seems so Orwellian. And in the last 3 minutes of the webinar, I just want to say that what I hear you saying, what I've heard everyone say today, is that concepts around safety and threat are just laden with bias. And unfortunately, those conversations pour into how we see healing and the need for it. So you all please close us out with one sentence that you want people to take away today about how we create change at the national, state, and local level. If you had to truncate what you shared with us today into a soundbite, Daryl, what might it be?
My always go-to is power to the people. You have the power. Don't ever think you don't. And it is through us that we create change. So power to the people.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Love our girls. Always listen, work with them, not for them. And they'll be our guiding force.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Bridget? You're muted.
I think I'm going to go with what I said earlier, which is that, you know, it's on us as adults. We have to go first. We have to show kindness and respect always. That's got to be, I know it's not always easy and nobody's asking you to be perfect, but keep that in your mind. We have to be, if we want that, if we want any change, we have to be willing to go first.
And hearing you say, be kind is something that will always resonate with me. So we're going to close it out by hearing from our girls. We have our final video. And in this video, they responded to the question around why do they need more counselors in schools, or do they need more counselors in schools? Here's what they had to say.
I absolutely agree. And I want to come back to Naima, because you made a good point about possibly having more counselors in schools. So who do you find more valuable in school? I know you already counselors, teachers, or are there any other professionals that you would have in school?
I feel like counselors are very valuable to my school. For example, my school, there's a lot of counselors. Like the ratio of counselors to students is so high. And I feel like the students in my school have so many resources, somebody to talk to if they need help. There's never any issues with behavior. Well, there is, but like if there is issues with behavior, there's always a counselor to help. You know, nobody feels left alone, nobody feels, you know, out of place, but there's always like so much support being brought to us. So I feel like counselors just make schools better in general. They make you feel safer, they make you feel like a family.
I know you're in the charter, I'm sorry, Medina. I know you're in a charter school, and Naima, Medina, I know you're in a public school. Do you have the same experience with the many counselors in your school?
No, that's just what I was about to talk about. Like she says, there's a variety of counselors. Like at our school, there is a counselor for each like section, but I think it's 9th and 10th got one counselor in it. And no, 9th and 10th and 11 and 12. But like recently,
so 2 counselors for
recently there's really been one. I don't know if it hasn't been there.
Okay.
So like there's only been one. Everybody go to literally asking after there's one.
So you're saying you have one counselor for the entire school body?
And how many students?
Wow.
And there's a lot of
It's
students.
like over like about at least close to 1,000 students in school.
No, they're very small. We're small.
If I could add to what Naima was saying, if there's a selection of counselors, you have like a plethora of people to choose from. Maybe if you don't connect with this person, you have somebody else you can feel comfortable and confided in. It just gives you options to see who you're comfortable with, because it may not be each and every counselor, which is bad. I don't know.
So we will stop there. Hear a call for cultural competency, hear a call for having more counselors in schools and a diverse staff of counselors in order for our young people to find someone to connect with. Thank you all for joining us today. We so appreciate you. And I always like to end on a high note because I feel like I'm a community organizer and I feel like joy is a form of resistance. So as we are heading out today, let's just remember that our girls we are survivors.